Next news, breaking news.
Tonight, the real Cuba story is not just that the lights went out. It's that Washington is starting to talk like the entire communist system may be beyond repair. Think about that. An island just 90 miles from Florida, sitting in darkness, run by a military-linked economic machine, with Secretary Marco Rubio now saying the people in charge may not be capable of the reforms needed to stop the collapse. What does that tell you? That tells you that very soon we may see an invasion of Cuba, much like we saw with Nicolas Maduro. Now, this is not routine foreign policy talk. That's a warning flare. And if the Trump administration believes that Cuba's failure is structural, not temporary, then the question changes very fast. What happens when survival is no longer the assumption? See, this is where the stakes get very real for America. The blackout that's happening right now across Cuba, it matters, not just because of the dramatic images. Blackouts are a symbol of something deeper: failing infrastructure, empty state coffers, collapsing public confidence in a regime that cannot deliver the basics of modern life. Secretary Rubio is making the point with usual clarity. He says Cuba is not truly run by a normal civilian government at all, but by GAESA, a military holding company that reportedly dominates huge sections of the economy while ordinary Cubans suffer. That means the issue is bigger than who gives the speeches in Havana. The issue is who controls the money, the assets, the system itself, and the Trump administration is framing this exactly right. A failed communist state 90 miles from our shore is not just Cuba's problem. It is a national security concern for the United States, especially when Rubio also points to Cuba's long record of supporting radical terror networks and hosting hostile intelligence activity. Now, before we go further, I need you to pay attention, because protecting your family from bureaucratic chaos, it matters here at home as well. If you or someone in your family is on Medicare, then this directly affects your wallet. Medicare is confusing by design. The mailers, the robocalls, the fine print, the commercials, it's all built to keep you overwhelmed, so you pick a plan and you never look at it again. That's the Medicare confusion industrial complex, and seniors are paying for it without even realizing it. See, Chapter is simple by design. One call, one advisor. They look at your doctors, your prescriptions, your needs, then help you compare plans very clearly. And some people could save more than $1,100 a year just by reviewing the coverage. Don't assume your current plan is your best plan. Call Chapter at 910-728-4109. That's the number you see right there on your screen. And get real help from someone who actually works for you. Now back to the Cuba story, because what Rubio said next may be the clearest signal yet of where this is all heading. See, this is what the corporate media will try to blur out. Rubio's not talking like this is a temporary shortage or a one-off emergency. He's talking about a structure that may be fundamentally broken, and he flatly said that the system needs serious reform and that he does not believe that the current people in charge are capable of delivering it. That's a massive tell. Once officials start talking less about patching the crisis and more about whether the regime itself can survive, you are no longer in normal diplomacy, you are now in transition territory. At the cabinet meeting last week, Secretary Rubio made it very clear. And I've got some clips here. This is from the cabinet meeting, but what happened in the halls of Congress today with Rubio squaring off against the Democrats was explosive. But he said that Cuba is in a lot of trouble. That's the pretext. Listen.
Cuba's in a lot of trouble because, unfortunately for them, it's run by a bunch of incompetent communists. And being communist is bad. Being an incompetent communist is like the worst. And but the country's been taken over by this company called GAESA that basically controls 70% of the economy. None of the money in that company goes to help the Cuban people, none of it. So we'll be talking to them, we'll be working on it. You know, we want something good for the Cuban people, and hopefully there'll be a good outcome there for them. There needs to be. It's 90 miles from our shores, and having a failed state 90 miles from our shores is a threat to the national security of the United States.
Cuba's next, folks. I'm telling you. Rubio calling Cuba a failed communist state sitting 90 miles off our shore. Now he drills down on the machine behind the misery. The military conglomerate GAESA, which he says controls virtually everything. This is directly from the Department of State today.
I mean,
Cuba's a very different
thing,
yeah.
right?
I think the misnomer about Cuba, or the misunderstanding about Cuba's actually not controlled by the government. Cuba's controlled by a military holding company named GAESA. And GAESA virtually owns anything, they own the tourist sector, they own mining, they own the gas stations, they own everything. They generate about 70% of Cuba's GDP is under the control of this military company. And they're sitting on between $14 and $17 billion in assets. So you have people literally starving, people literally like power grid that hasn't been maintained in 10 years. And yet you have this holding military company sitting on these assets. And by the way, not a penny of the money in the military holding company translates over to the public treasury. So the fundamental challenge we have here is that Cuba needs to be, in order for it not to continue to be a failed state, which poses a threat to the United States, they need systemic and serious reform. They need to have economic reforms. And the question is, can they possibly reform, given the people who are currently in charge, both of GAESA and of their government? And I think the answer is they can. I really don't believe this system is capable of reform unless new people take over.
Unless new people take over. So it's not just bad government. Rubio says the real power sits with the military empire hoarding billions while Cubans go hungry. Next, he goes a step further and says the system won't change unless new people take over.
So the fundamental challenge we have here is that Cuba needs to be, in order for it not to continue to be a failed state, which poses a threat to the United States, they need systemic and serious reform. They need to have economic reforms. And the question is, can they possibly reform, given the people who are currently in charge, both of GAESA and of their government? And I think the answer is they can. I really don't believe this system is capable of reform unless new people take over or a new mindset takes hold. Now, we've engaged in conversations with them. We've offered them what I think needs to happen in order for their economy to recover. And that's the last point I would make, because I think somebody raised this issue of oil blockade. Cuba was having blackouts well before January 3rd of this year. They were having blackouts for years. And they were having blackouts for two reasons. Number one, no one will give you free oil except Maduro. That's what's changed here. What's changed here is they're no longer getting free oil from Venezuela. And number two, the main reason why they have energy blackouts is because they didn't invest a single dollar back into their plants, back into improving their plants. And they could have bought this equipment from any company in the world, but they didn't invest in it. Instead, they invested it to build tourist hotels that now sit empty because there's no tourism into Cuba. So Cuba's a little bit more complicated than Venezuela, but it's a mess.
It's a mess. His message blunt: the regime can't fix itself. Next, he lays out why this isn't just tyranny at home. He says Cuba has spent decades backing left-wing terror across the entire hemisphere.
Cuba has sponsored terrorism and it's supported groups. For example, virtually every left-wing, radical, violent terrorist group in the Western Hemisphere has at some point relied on support from Cuba. The ELN, the FARC dissidents, including them, have been involved there. We also know, for example, that Cuba continues to host a pretty substantial collection intelligence sites on behalf of the Chinese and the Russians. But you look at the region and you look at all of these leftist Marxist terrorist organizations, all of them, in many cases, got their seed money from the Cubans.
The case is clearly being made by Marco Rubio that the invasion of Cuba is imminent. And that is why Cuban state media is reporting that revolutionary naval units held coastal missile and combat diving drills to repel any potential future U.S. invasion. Check this out. This is from Cuban State News.
As part of the ongoing combat readiness training of the Revolutionary Navy, coastal missile units successfully carried out a practical exercise within the Sandino Cabañas defense zone of the Mariel municipality, specifically aimed at engaging enemy landing craft. This maneuver effectively put the strategy for these specific scenarios into practice. Furthermore, a combat diving and coastal missile firing exercise was also conducted, meticulously reproducing the most complex conditions of a real-world situation. In this way, the engagement provided the combatants with the opportunity to prepare themselves in the precise direction and execution of fire under highly demanding operational conditions. This crucial action ensures they acquire the essential experience required to effectively confront any military aggression.
Onward to victory. Always!
So, Cuban propaganda. The drills may look tough, but back on the island, the regime can't even keep the lights on. This next report shows Cuba hit by total blackout with the power grid collapsing across the entire country. Representative Hugh Blackwell, just in total blackout across all of Cuba, the entire island, virtually zero electricity as U.S. oil and energy blockade tightens. Power plants dead, streets dark, regime in panic.
Now at Havana, Cuba, where the power is out across the entire island, according to local officials there. Cuba is under a U.S. energy blockade. It has not had any oil shipments in 3 months. Chief Washington correspondent Mike Emanuel reporting live on the huge changes and the difficult situation.
Difficult situation indeed. Watch the oil tankers. That's what I've been told. Watch for the Russian oil tankers. So while the communist regime stages war games and its grid falls apart, the big question is what a real confrontation would look like. Next up, a breakdown of Cuba's actual military strength. 50,000 troops, aging aircraft, Soviet junk, and while the aftermath could be the real fight. On paper, it's not a fight. In practice, it could be a quagmire, says Mario Nafal.
Tonight, the chief of Cuba's armed forces joining military drills on the island in the face of increasing U.S. pressure. Questions tonight about Cuba's level of preparation for possible U.S. military action. Here's Cristina Vasquez.
Our military capabilities, as we have seen, even in Iran and other places, are very strong.
And if the U.S. is weighing military intervention in Cuba, Local 10 Cuba analyst Dr. Andy Gomez told us this about the communist island's military.
They have 30 airplanes, all makes, about 3,000 all equipment of, tanks, personnel movement, 50,000 regular soldiers. That's pretty small.
Aging Soviet-era equipment, explained to FIU's Defense and National Security Research Vice Provost, Dr. Brian Fonseca.
If they were to do a smash and grab kind of operation like they did with Nicolas Maduro, they would probably meet very little resistance.
But one wild card, he says, is if there is a pronounced U.S. presence on the ground, the potential of a guerrilla warfare strategy from militias comprised of Castro regime loyalists.
It has to be careful it doesn't engage the Cuban people. And that might, bring the Americans into a more pronounced conflict. And that would be a disaster for domestic policy, too, especially as we lead into the November 2026 midterms.
And as high-stakes negotiations between the U.S. and Cuba appear to stall, Cuban officials say they are prepared to defend themselves.
Survive through repression, censorship, fear.
As U.S. leaders continue to make the case for intervention.
The desire for freedom has never disappeared.
That's Republican Congressman Carlos Jimenez speaking at an event at Miami-Dade College hosted by World Affairs Council of Miami's Aaron Rosen.
Cuba would not really be able to match up to the United States in a one-to-one conflict. However, if the U.S. and Cuba did find itself at war and the U.S. decimated Cuba's military, it would very soon find that it inherits Cuba's political future. And there are very big open questions about what that might mean for what comes next.
This as public opinion on this issue remains polarized. While surveys here in South Florida found the majority of Cuban Americans support U.S. military intervention in Cuba, national polling has found the majority of Americans do not. Glenna?
Christina, thank you.
And that is the local news there. So, what does it all really mean? It means that the Trump administration appears to be looking at Cuba and seeing not an isolated blackout, not another propaganda cycle, but a communist system rotting from the inside out. Rubio's framing is the key. National security, governance, economic control, and long-term stability. That is the new center of gravity. When he says that Cuba needs serious systemic reform and doubts the current rulers can pull it off, the message is obvious. Washington is weighing the possibility that the regime can't fix itself. The military drills out of Havana may generate headlines, but they also look like panic theater from a crumbling dictatorship. The real fight's not over missiles or slogans, it's over whether Cuba's power structure can endure another round of failure without breaking apart. So the bottom line is this. The darkness over Cuba is not the story by itself. The darkness is the symbol of communist failure, regime corruption, and institutional decay just off America's coast. President Trump's administration is right to treat that as a serious U.S. concern, and Secretary Rubio is saying out loud what too many weak-kneed diplomats refuse to admit for years. This problem is structural. If GAESA controls the wealth, if the regime cannot keep the power on, if the people are starving while the military-linked elite sit on billions, then this is not a reform issue or on the edges. It's a legitimacy crisis at the core. And once that becomes the conversation, everything changes. So I want to hear from you. Do you believe that this communist regime in Cuba can reform itself? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments and share this video with someone who still thinks that communism only fails in theory. If you want more America First reporting the corporate media won't touch, subscribe, turn on your notifications right now. But most importantly, you see that secret number I've posted on the screen right there? Thousands of patriots have already texted the words raw feed to 844-840-4963. They're getting the notifications that they're hoping YouTube would send. But they're getting them from me. They're not waiting for the algorithm to determine what's good for you. Because you're here for a reason and you want the truth. I will not let you down. I will give you the truth every single night. A simple text message right to your phone from me. Celebrate America 250 with us, would you? Check out the merch shelf below this video and let's celebrate together.
The system controls information. Information control is power.
They don't want you to see this.
The truth only survives together. They don't want this shared. Share this now.